Welcome.
Fancy new technology given to me by the government.
My big brain makes me so attractive.
I want to read through Lord of the Rings. I haven't yet. I feel kind of ashamed.
Thanks for stopping by.
I just heard Caleb flailing around with his tongue.
Do this or I'll kill you. It's like you were going to kill me anyway. You're an executioner.
To see.
Brian has ascended. He is a god.
What's up?
They would say, oh, you think you're cute? Well, I think this bullet's also pretty cute. Pow!
In Brian's attic.
Or do we need to whip ourselves and cry?
Hey, Bobby, step up. Boom! Bobby's head falls on the floor.
You can really download it.
You can really download it.
You can really download it. Welcome to Brian's Attic. I'm Brian.
I'm Andrew.
I'm Caleb.
He is
And we
Caleb.
did it the right way this time. So
Yes, Andrew is being recorded.
So
Only Andrew. It will be a very quiet podcast.
Beautiful.
we were talking about, or at least I had brought up older films, and because I had recently watched.
And as I recall, you mentioned specifically Zulu.
Yeah, I had watched Zulu,
which you said you liked because of its composition and the emotionality it was able to draw from you. And you mentioned something about newer cinema feeling like it's lacking something. And you were asking us if we had seen any older films.
Yep.
And what our impressions of them were.
Yep.
If I've gotten the measure of your comments.
Yeah, I mean, and I was going to mention real quickly, in addition to that, I just think, like, there's, like, this cinematography, the way everything was shot, the care that was taken. It was filmed on location for authenticity's sake. There was so much care taken into the making of the film, even though it has a fraction of the budget that modern day films have. And there's like almost a timeless quality to it. And a lot of the older films that I've seen, and obviously we don't have the benefit of being like 30 years down the line from the films that are being made today and only having the good ones left over, because all the terrible films from that era aren't playing on stations now for the most part. It's mainly just the good films that have survived. But
well, it's also much easier to make a film these days.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably the fact that producers would be unwilling to spend money on ventures that they imagined would not have the most appeal for the most return on their investment. Whereas nowadays you can make a sort of cult classic. You can aim to be a cult classic and just make a modest return, which probably leads to the proliferation of a lot more cinema in general, added on top of the fact that, you know, anyone with a phone can make a film now.
So what do you think's been what do you think's been lost though? If you I guess to answer the first question, if you guys have you watched any older films like that stand out to you that you really enjoy? Like It's a Wonderful Life.
Do you want to go first, Brian, or should I?
Wait, what was the question?
Have we watched any older films that stand out to us?
I haven't really watched much of anything lately.
I guess I'll go then. I recall two older films. One was in black and white, and the other was in color. The first one was 12 Angry Men, which I think should be
a good one.
Fairly familiar to our audience. But just in case, it takes place almost entirely within the deliberation chambers of a jury, attempting to determine the guilt or innocence of a man accused of killing his father. It begins with, the main story proper takes up with all but one of the jurors voting guilty, and it goes through almost all the jurors being talked into voting not guilty by one guy who doesn't believe that there's enough evidence to convict. That one was in black and white. At the time, I loved it. I thought it was really interesting. Now I think there are. I'd have to go see it again because it's been like maybe 15 years since I've seen that.
So you haven't exactly seen this recently?
No, not at all. No. But I do remember liking it. I'd have to go back and watch it again to give you a more detailed review. But I couldn't help but feel like some of the writing was a little facile, I guess.
There are definitely problems with the legal process represented in that movie, which was originally a stage play.
I was actually thinking of like his arguments for trying to convince people kind of feel like.
You mean the actual character?
Yeah,
and his ability to do that?
They feel more like emotional appeals.
They are.
Which doesn't really strike me as particularly impressive if he's trying to establish objective legal innocence or guilt. Like you could effectively just remove the law and just make it about convincing people who have, like, and there is no law. It's just like, hey, should we kick this guy off the island or not? And then have him make these emotional appeals.
I think,
but when it becomes a back courtroom scene, I feel like we should be paying attention more to, what are the potential possibilities.
I think part of the point of the movie is that it's showing how people's prejudice and their own, what people are bringing into a verdict like that. And it's not necessarily talking about a court case specifically in this movie. It's really individuals and your perception of them, and how much it depends on whether you're going to focus on the negative aspects or the positive aspects of other people.
Yeah, the whole idea of it being a court case is like backdrop for the story that's being told.
I think you could argue that that's just to show the stakes.
Yeah, that's what I mean by backdrop. That's just.
I was going to mention I've seen a lot of court.
I thought you were going to say that it being a court case hurts the case, hurts the author's thematic point.
I think
because
maybe not a
court
thematic
case should
point.
be logical.
It doesn't hurt the thematic point, but I do think the fact that a court should be logical hurts the. I think the theme exists outside of the backdrop, but the backdrop is an unfortunate choice, in my opinion. If you had made it more just like a council of people in their village, maybe it would seem less jarring.
Like I said, there are definitely problems with the legal process in the play.
Yeah, I suppose it's
like
what you want out of the film, though.
Introducing evidence to support your conclusion that was not actually presented in court.
Yes. Like
one of the witnesses having the dimples that are in the nose from the nose pieces of glasses. It's like that's
or when
I'm not sure what that would be called.
Bring up the knife and he just produces an exact copy, and it's like, oh, shouldn't that have been entered into evidence? Like, hey, by the way, there's more than one of these things that we claimed was completely unique. So maybe
I don't remember.
I haven't seen the film. I'm gonna be honest, I haven't seen.
Well, no. So they're talking about how the guy has to be guilty because he had the knife that was one of a kind, and that knife was also the one that stabbed the dude. And then the guy who doesn't believe that he's guilty, just like in like the middle of deliberation after the trial's over, he just pulls out a knife and stabs the table with it, and he's just like,
I think the idea is that the guy, the juror who had the copy of the knife, couldn't see it closely enough to identify it as not unique.
Oh.
At the time, not until he'd seen it more closely in the juror's room.
I see.
So what was the other?
Well, that was the black and white film. The other film, which I had seen more recently, maybe like 3 years ago or so, was The Magnificent Seven, which was about like 7 cowboys in the U.S. Southwest protecting this. Or it was somewhere in like the southwestern part of North America, like protecting this town from like banditos or whatever.
Based off of Seven Samurai, right? Or Seven Samurai?
Yeah, it was based off of, it was just adapted from that.
Did you, now with these films, even though they had their issues, I guess what I could say is, did they seem like they were more rich than maybe modern cinema you've seen? Or, I mean, what's kind of your take on that?
I think that this is a natural progression in almost any medium of storytelling, when the tools available for making the story more visually impressive have a tendency to become focused on more than the message itself. So like, and for a very lay example of this, like just a very grug caveman expression of this, is like when the CGI is like way better than any of the dialogue.
King Kong versus Godzilla.
I can see where the budget went. It was to make it look visually impressive, but like things that look visually impressive that have no substance, it's like that's it's just like a 2D cutout. Like, oh, that looks nice, and you just tip it over, and it's like, oh, no, it doesn't.
That's what I was gonna say. Like I've watched television shows, like older television shows from the 60s and stuff as well. I find the dialogue to be so much better so much more well written, and it's because they were.
Let's be honest, you're just thinking of Star Trek.
But think about it. Star Trek, the writing in Star Trek, the original series, is pretty phenomenal. You know, obviously there's stuff that's like...
It is better than the movies.
Oh, yeah, take the modern movies, for example.
The new movies.
Like how much money they put in compared to the limited budget.
Think also of the added dimension.
Okay, not to say that the writing of the new movies, the dialogue, is necessarily bad. It's just very different and it definitely is not following the same pattern of the original series. It is not supposed to be an imitation. If it was, it's a very bad imitation. I think it's supposed
Generic
to be
for mass
more
audiences.
of its own thing.
Yeah, that's
more modern audiences, because it has that same kind of almost Marvel-esque
that's why I don't
dialogue
like it.
style.
I mean, I guess what I would say is...
which is fitting for Marvel, but maybe not Star Trek.
I actually have found that low-budget sci-fi shows have way better dialogue. That's just there's a natural curve. You look at Stargate SG-1, it was about $1 million per episode, which sounds like a lot, but it really isn't, because when you look at the Mandalorian's budget, for example, $15 million per episode. Now, I'm not saying the Mandalorian has terrible writing. I mean, it's an okay show, but it never made me feel anything like any really, really, really strong emotions. And so I guess what I'm...
Hang on a second. The Mandalorian is derivative, not because of its theme or subject matter, but because of the universe. It is derived from the Star Wars universe. There are things it has to be in accordance with, and it can't make stuff up as it goes. It doesn't have complete creative control and freedom, the same way that the makers of Stargate SG-1 and Star Trek did.
Yeah, I understand. It's because it's nested within an expanded universe, and that's the problem with a lot of modern films.
So think of how that would affect like the Star Trek films. They have to deal with the fact that they can't decide things that have already been decided like 60 years ago. Like, you don't have the ability to make that decision. So anyone who's trying to be creative can't do it in a Tolkien-esque way, where they're like where they're creating something whole cloth. They're working under restraints.
I will say,
and while restrictions breed creativity, but if there are so many restrictions because someone else has already fleshed everything out, then like what? There's nothing
Star Trek tried to break it away.
Unless you've got some kind of
Kelvin timeline.
Creative idea.
They tried to make another timeline so then they could be creative. But the problem is, even though they made a different timeline, it wasn't creatively written because it was just all the information.
Tried something similar with Star Wars.
And why do you think that is? Partially because there's so much of a focus on, with better cameras that pick up more, you can have better choreography that gets noticed. So a lot of it is on the lightsaber fight scenes. A lot of it would be on the force powers and the lightning and the whatever. And like that goes to the core of show don't tell, or rather show flashy things that everyone can immediately appreciate in like a 30-second trailer. But like a subtler scene between Mos Eisley or whatever her name was, Mos
Eisley
Khalifa.
is a place.
Yeah.
Who is the lady?
Maz Katan.
Which one?
Maz Katan?
Maz Kanata?
Yeah, her. The lady with like the sunken in tiny eyes. It looks like she looks like she's from Pan's Labyrinth.
She looks like
that's what she looks like. Maz Kanata, like, and like Rey or something that have like an actual subtle scene that might have been like good for establishing something. Like you can't put that in a trailer and have people understand it. And that's why. And even in the movie, you can't put that in the movie and like have people care about it. And and you know how I know? It's because that was when they played that one lick from like the original movie.
Now I do know that's copyrighted.
Whatever, dude. Like it'll be able to pick that up. Anyway, I remember when I was watching the movie for the first time in like 2015, and I was going in with like expectations and hope, like this is gonna be great. I heard that and I got chills, and I was like, whoa! Like I was like, this is great. They're honoring the original spirit of the movie. And then like they played it maybe like 3 or 4 more times within the next 20 minutes, and I realized this was a soulless cash grab, and all of my expectations, all of the goodwill immediately evaporated. I was like, these people suck. And this kind of became Andrew Hates Star Wars.
In the movie starting to shrink up, and
basically my heart sank and my anger flared. But basically the point I'm trying to make is even they understand that the people who are watching this stuff don't care about subtle scenes that have rich dialogue. They're trying to please the people who want to see the lightsabers.
Here's what how I want to loop it back in though to the conversation if I could. I think that moviegoers, generally speaking, were perceived as more intelligent back in the day because the dialogue, like, you know, was obviously they didn't have CGI fest because they didn't have the ability to make CG fights look nearly as good as they were now. So even if you're talking and there wasn't a lot of material that people were falling back on to try to do nostalgia grabs like they're doing with Star Wars. And so I guess what I'm saying is what I'm finding myself more appreciating now, especially when I go back and watch older cinema, is the fact that back in the day they treated audiences as if they were intelligent. And there still is films that do that, and there still is TV shows that do that, but not the mainstream ones. But like we're talking back in the day, there were some mainstream movies that were created that were extremely popular and box office hits that were well written, original, that were creative. And I just, it saddens me that the majority of like the mainstream films are like you're talking about nowadays. For example, the new Star Wars films, derivative cash grabs going after nostalgia. They're not films that were created to tell a coherent story with good dialogue and interesting characters, and they're not challenging. You're not challenged at all when you go see the new Star Wars films. There's nothing that like grips you. There's nothing that like, you know, makes you think. I was gonna bring up,
but they killed Chewbacca.
Not the other movie I saw recently that was older was called The Best Years of Our Lives, and it's about World War II veterans coming back after the war and having to adjust their lives. One of them's disabled. He had his hands blown off in the war, so he has to use prongs because back in the 40s, 50s they didn't even have like prosthetics.
See the hook-handed man from a series of unfortunate events.
And he's younger, so like his high school sweetheart, like she still loves him, but he's very like hesitant to like spend time with her because he's afraid that she'll find him to be a freak and that she won't want him to be with him. There's a guy, Fred, who went overseas, who was a what would you call it? He's kind of a screw up, but he did really well in the military. And when he came back, he had married a woman right before he left who was like working at a bar just in the spirit of the moment, like, oh, I'm gonna leave, I'm never gonna go back. And he had been so excited to come back to America after the war to come to his wife, come to realize she only cared about him when he had a lot of money and a lot of time. So as soon as they blew through the GI Bill money that had come in and he had to work, like a crummy job, he was miserable at the place. So it's kind of, he had to adjust to that. She eventually cheated on him and divorced him. That's part of it. But he found true love. I know it sounds really cheesy, but like it's actually very dramatic and gripping. And the last guy was a banker who was successful before the war. But when he came back, he found that the bank he was working at was super hollow because they were denying people left and right, as bankers have to do, because they were more, I guess you could say, like the veterans coming in didn't have anything to put against what they were wanting to take out to get property or do other things. And so he was conflicted because he's like, oh, so we're just never going to support anybody. So I'm at this job where like pretty much my job is to evaluate people and be like, hey, you're not worth taking a risk on. And so he kind of had a crisis as far as his career. But it's about these three guys' stories and how they weave together and how they figure things out. And it was like, it made me feel something. It made me think about things. It made me think about like that we stand on the shoulders of giants. Just thinking about the previous generations and what they went through with war and what they left behind and how they had to readjust, like it just took me to another era, another time. And it's like most modern films I've seen do not do that. And I'm sorry if that's kind of a rant and I was describing the movie.
What movie was this? It's called
The Best Years of Our Lives. It was
and how old
1946.
Is it?
So it came out right after the war.
Okay, so it is an older movie. I wasn't sure if you were saying it was a more modern movie that was an exception to the
it's
rule,
an older film.
Or an older movie that exemplifies what you're talking about. Yeah, it exemplifies
what I'm talking about. It's like, and I would never want to, I don't normally care about, like, if there's a modern love story that came out or a movie that talks about people coming back from the war, it would not be nearly as well written as this one is. Just on average. On average,
Right. I was going to say, I mean, you still have people making those kinds of artistic, slower, for lack of a better word, movies. I was going to say the flashiness, and I wouldn't necessarily say that movie producers and movie makers are treating audiences more like they're stupid. I would say that it's more likely explained as competition, that the nature of entertainment at the time, older, there weren't as many movies being made. There weren't as many the competition vying for audience's attention was not as dog eat dog, I guess. Your competition was like musicals, stage plays, Broadway, orchestra, other such things.
Sports.
But nowadays you have all of those things and more. You've got YouTube, you've got your television. Nowadays you've got the movie theater industry like falling apart because of streaming services. People don't care enough to go to the movies all as much. And so I think it's that same kind of thing. In fact, I was just listening to another podcast where they were talking about comedy. This guy, I don't know who it was, but he would watch like America's funniest home videos on YouTube, or similar things like fail videos, I guess, on YouTube, and write his comedy at a similar kind of snappy pace, because that was his true competition, not other comedy shows per se, but taking people's attention away from something like YouTube. So that it's not so much audiences being stupid, so much as there are a whole lot more things to grab people's attention, and people's attention is grabbed by, movement, dopamine releases in the brain, and that flashiness tends to.
And there still is a market for, I guess you could say, like,
on
I know this is very
instinctual
cliche,
level.
and I know there's other companies that make movies, but like A24 puts out movies that are more indie films. They'll pick them up, and not all their films
Is that the
are as equally as good as each other, but there still is like independent film companies that are putting out films that are like unique and creative, that maybe don't have as big of a box office, that catch the eyes of people who want to maybe dig in with a more slow movie, you could say, one that's maybe has better written dialogue, even if the CG is not as good, or if there's no CG at all, and just dig into it. So I guess you're right. I don't think it's that there isn't maybe a market even for movies that are, or television shows, or whatever you say, media that's better written, better created. I think it's just the fact that there is so many options now, and that's just not the main target audience isn't going to go for it,
It could be that the same number of those well-written, slower shows are being made. They're just lost among all of the flashy garbage. Though I do think probably there is a number who are, they've diverted away from that to appeal more to the... So it's probably dropped some, but they're still out there, a number somewhere.
I just hope that I guess what I would say...
Because there's still an audience
I
for
do
those.
hope that, and again, this is maybe optimistic, but... It would be awesome if the mainstream of society could get back to things that are less vapid and quick. It's, like you're talking about with the dopamine hits and the quick action scenes and stuff like that. Like, that's cool, and there's a place for that. But I feel like our culture's lost something as far as film and cinema and television, where it's like people don't want to think anymore about stuff. They just want to feel good. And, I'm fine for a feel-good movie, but also I like thought-provoking things. You guys could say, because I know you guys are more bookworms than me, although I do read, like, we'll just turn to a book. And it's like, well, yes, but I also would like there to be thought-provoking media, not just these quick, YouTube snippets, or audio sound bites, I'd like people to start thinking more about things and slowing down.
All right. And to wrap us up, what is one movie that you think is a good suggestion for people to watch?
Caleb, you go first.
I'd say Zulu. If you're, again, that comes to mind because I just saw it, but it's one of if you're really interested in military history, if you're interested in seeing camaraderie be built between people and people standing up in the face of innumerable odds, check out Zulu. It's a very well-crafted, well-put-together film, and you don't see a lot of movies about people having honor or valor necessarily anymore, or if you do, it's kind of like it doesn't represent like a truly honorable person well, but that film is just amazing. So I'd say check out Zulu. You can watch it for free online right now, actually, with ads, because I think it's on Peacock, but that's where I watched it, so that's what I would recommend.
I recommend you watch Lord of the Rings, the Peter Jackson films.
Extended cut?
Yeah, it should be pretty self-evident why.
Extended cut?
Sure, why not?
Maybe start with the theatrical cut.
Yeah, start with that.
Because that would probably make a better movie, more objectively, or maybe subjectively speaking.
It does make a better movie, yes.
I guess the extended cuts will challenge your attention span.
There you go. Get that challenge.
And then once you're done, read the books.
For some reason, the movie that came to mind for me, perhaps not so much because I love watching this movie. I've only seen it once. I was going to say 2001: A Space Odyssey.
That's a phenomenal film.
Because it is weird, and everyone should see it at least once. Just because it's more revolutionary in its special effects, not so much its writing and dialogue. It's monkeys for like the first 20 minutes of the movie. I thought I accidentally started Planet of the Apes.
That film's.
It's definitely a movie to make you
And
think.
if you're a
though.
sci-fi aficionado,
Also, HAL 9000.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say HAL 9000 is iconic.
Classic sci-fi films, pretty good.
But yeah, 2001: A Space Odyssey is definitely one that will challenge your attention span as well in a very artistic way.
And watch all those movies in one session. Don't leave until bring some water bottles so you don't have to get up to go to the bathroom.
2001: A Space Odyssey is 2.5 hours long. Yeah.
Zulu's 2.5, and Lord of the Rings is I don't know what the length is, but
For all 3 movies, extended cuts, I think it's about 11 hours. Like 9 to 11, somewhere around there. Thank you for listening to this episode of Brian's Attic. And of course, a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you would like to support Brian's Attic, head over to patreon.com/briansattic or use the link in the description.